Hello, I'm Esther Gitu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. U.S. President Joe Biden ends his re-election bid and endorses Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic Party's nominee. Sudanese civilians suffer physical and mental wounds of violence exacerbated by the collapse of the health system and the lack of an international humanitarian response. And a self-described former gangster is South Africa's new sports minister. He wants to promote a sport that has associations with the country's gangster culture. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. U.S. President Joe Biden has ended his re-election bid and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic Party's nominee on the November ballot. VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara has the details.
After weeks resisting questions of his mental acuity and insisting he would remain in the race, President Joe Biden announced he is ending his campaign and will not seek re-election in November. "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president," he announced on social media just before 2 p.m. Sunday. Biden said while he had intended to seek re-election, he believes it is in the best interest of his Democratic Party and the country to stand down and focus solely on fulfilling his duties as U.S. president for the remainder of his term. Biden thanked Vice President Kamala Harris for being an extraordinary partner. In another social media post, he offered his full support and endorsement for Harris to be the party's nominee.
Politically, it would be meaningful because these delegates are supportive of Joe Biden and they would certainly listen to him. But he can't automatically transfer his delegates to Harris or anybody else for that matter.
Almost all 3,896 Democratic delegates meeting at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, Illinois next month have pledged votes to Biden, who swept the primary contest in the country. But under DNC rules, those pledges can be changed. Calls for Biden to pass the torch grew louder in recent days, including from top Democratic lawmakers. 58% of Democrats think Vice President Harris would make a good president, according to a new poll from AP North. Overall, 30% of Americans think she would. If Democrats settle on Harris leading the presidential ticket, they must also select her running mate. Biden said he will speak to the American public later this week in more detail about his decision. Donald Trump, officially nominated by Republicans as their presidential nominee Thursday, issued his statement on social media. Crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
For more insight on President Biden ending his bid for a second term as U.S. Commander-in-Chief, I'm joined live from the White House by VOA correspondent Anita Powell. Anita, what's the reaction from President Biden's close allies and aides following his announcement?
This was certainly a surprise, not just outside the White House, but inside the White House, where we heard that President Joe Biden released this and some of his aides found out a minute later. He didn't tell them before he pulled the trigger and made this decision. So there's a lot of surprise. There are a lot of questions about what happens next. But we just heard from the vice president. She appeared at an event for student athletes, and she praised the president's track record of service to his country and I guess tried to reassure Americans that the boat remains upright and it's still smooth sailing to the election, which one can hope is true.
So will his announcement mean some changes in terms of staffing and some of the duties that were carried out by his allies and, his appointees at the White House?
Well, this remains the Biden administration, at least until January, until Inauguration Day, when the next president is inaugurated. So I think I don't want to predict anything, but in terms of, cabinet officials, in terms of high-level officials, they're likely to stick with the Biden administration, at least for a little while. So I think we're not likely to see any huge changes in the actual governance, in the actual governing branch. Whereas in the campaign, we may see some changes. A lot of that campaign infrastructure has already shifted over to the Harris campaign, but we may see some changes there. But I think in terms of familiar faces from the White House, Many of them are likely to stick around, including, as Joe Biden said, he will, and he will try to serve to the end of his term.
And how are Kamala Harris staff reacting to Biden's handover?
Well, as I said, we just heard from the vice president herself. There's a mix, I think, of gratitude to the president, but also an acknowledgement of the challenges ahead. And I think that's clear coming out of the vice president's office. We're seeing a lot of sudden movements. For example, this afternoon, she'll be going to Delaware for a political event, likely where she'll meet with the president and discuss the path forward. So there's both excitement, but also uncertainty, because America's never been in this unique situation before.
In terms of what you saw this morning as you went to the White House, any changes, any major changes in terms of the mood of the workers there? What did you see?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that President Biden remains in Delaware, where he's recovering from COVID. So it's a kind of a strange atmosphere here at the White House because the president isn't home. So, of course, that's going to lead to questions in his absence. But I think there's a lot of wait and see happening here at the White House today. I also want to note that outside the White House this morning, there were protesters in anticipation of a major event tomorrow, which is the visit of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the United States. He's expected to speak before Congress on the 24th. And so there is that excitement and that drama happening right outside the White House today, and we expect tomorrow. So a lot of these major issues that are following the Biden administration, that are following just the work of any White House, are continuing. And business is marching on as usual in some ways, but meanwhile there are lots of questions about what the future holds.
Anita, many thanks for your reporting. VOA correspondent Anita Power reporting live for us from the White House. VOA spoke to Kenyans on the streets of Nairobi to get their reaction to Joe Biden's withdrawal from the U.S. presidential race.
Whatever President Biden has done is commendable, because he has portrayed to the world it's not all about power. Once you feel what you've done is sufficient and it's enough, you can step out, go and mentor the others, because the country is not just about you. There are very many people who can govern, who can give direction.
When his time has come to an end, you have to pave way for other leaders to come. It doesn't show that you are hungry of power, but it shows a lot of democracy as the United States of America. President Biden has shown the world that he can manage despite his old age.
Biden had to drop out because all the odds are stacked against him. He can't beat Trump. So to salvage the image and give the Democratic Party an opportunity, he had no choice but to exit from the race. The challenge is he exited and then he endorsed Kamala Harris. The numbers are not in favor of Kamala Harris. Michelle Obama would have been the ideal candidate, because the numbers were indicating that she would beat Biden by 6%. But she has said she's not ready to run.
Not such a bad idea for him to take a back seat. He didn't seem to have the energy he had the time he was being elected.
Him dropping out was the least expected, but as we can see, it will have like an adverse effect on the elections, and also it has given the other party an upper hand in winning. And
okay, I feel like at this point in his career, he is advanced and experienced, and if he chose to get out of the race right now, then he has his reasons, and they are probably important.
Kenyans reacting to Joe Biden's withdrawal from the U.S. presidential race. For perspective on President Biden's withdrawal from the presidential race, I'm joined from here in Washington by Bruce Fine, an American lawyer specializing in constitutional and international law. Bruce, tell us about the road ahead for Biden's pledged delegates at the Democratic National Convention to vote for Kamala Harris.
Well, the pledged delegates are now free of any obligation to vote for one candidate or another. But the U.S. Supreme Court has made clear for decades that political parties are entitled to decide how they wish their nominees to be selected. So the Democratic Party could change the rules and force the Biden delegates to vote for anyone he designated, which would be Kamala Harris. But even putting that aside, I do think that at present, there really has surfaced no other viable candidate other than Kamala Harris. All the major gubernatorial possibilities from Michigan, from Pennsylvania, from California have all said we're not interested. The only names that have surfaced are Joe Manchin, a senator from West Virginia, and Marianne Williamson, who's kind of a spiritualist. These are featherweights that are not going to attract any delegates. So I think the Democrats recognize that any kind of fracturing from unity at Chicago next month is going to be devastating to their November chances. And also you need to remember, and this is kind of cuts in the other direction against Kamala Harris, I think many feel that to win this race at this late stage with a new face is like a sprint up Mount Olympus. And the other possible challengers are young. They could wait till 2024, and they don't want an albatross if Trump wins a runaway election.
Bruce, let me interject here a little bit. If Biden is unfit to run for president due to health reasons, how will he run the country for the next 3 months?
Well, Mr. Biden didn't say that he was disabled under the 25th Amendment that made it proper for him to step aside. Now, maybe that may be true. And if he is disabled and the 25th Amendment would apply, that is, a majority of his cabinet would approach the president and ask and pass a resolution saying, hey, you're disabled, the vice president needs to step into your shoes. That issue then would go to Congress that could ratify it or reject it. But I don't think that President Biden, when he withdrew his candidacy for re-election, said, I'm totally unfit, that's why I'm not doing it. Now, that may have been the underlying reason, but he didn't concede that fact. So there's where we are. This is not unprecedented. Woodrow Wilson in 1919, 1920, when he was president, was disabled. He had a stroke for the last 18 months of his presidency. He really was almost non-compos mentis. His wife ran the country, and we survived. And it may be that way. Remember, we have a lot of aides to the president. It's a little bit frightening, however, since we do have a nuclear age now, to think if we don't have a president who's the only one who can authorize nuclear weapons or retaliation, is really not capable of knowing what real circumstances are. But you've identified a real problem. But I think we have survived many, many months where it's been obvious that Mr. Biden has been in senescence at least. And he's kind of struggles on. This is not new. It just happened yesterday. I think we'll survive through November.
Bruce, many thanks for your insight into this. We still have a long way. We'll be talking about this for quite some time. Bruce Fein is an American lawyer specializing in constitutional and international law. U.S. President Joe Biden's withdrawal from the 2024 presidential race has sent seismic political shockwaves worldwide as the news of Biden's decision spreads. Diverse global reactions is emerging. VOA's Paul Ndiho spoke with Sir Leonard Anyogo, a constitutional lawyer and political analyst based in Abuja, Nigeria. Anyogo's perspective is that Biden's willingness to step aside is a testament to the enduring strength of American democracy, where no individual is greater than the party.
It's rare for someone who has a nomination to willingly decline, not necessarily due to pressure, because we've had this in Africa generally, that people sit tight. So it was a bit surprising, but for the interest and the greater interest of Americans, Joe Biden has once again shown that he's a perfect gentleman, putting the interest of America above his personal interest. Why I say it's a bit surprising to an average African. We've seen where most African leaders sit tight, even when they have challenges with health or infirmity of the mind. The only succor we have in Africa that has come this far, or like an example, is late President Nelson Mandela, who did just first term in South Africa. And he had all the rights, first right of refusal to even continue to do his second term, but he willingly declined. Since Nelson Mandela, we've not seen any African leader that had an opportunity of running an election, especially a sitting African leader, that has declined his nomination. Joe Biden has shown that he's a perfect gentleman, and American is a beacon of hope and beacon of leadership.
To your point, there are a lot of people who have suggested that, for example, maybe this will bring about unity. Earlier you referred to the United States as a beacon of hope for democracy. But within the Democratic Party itself, heavily divided. They ganged up on Joe Biden and literally stopped him from running again. So is that a democracy? You talked about unity. There is no unity in the Democratic Party as we speak. So what kind of message does it send to people who are looking at this scenario and saying, hey, as long as if it plays in my favor, why not?
The Democratic Party is an institution. So it's not just about Joe Biden. So that's why I say when you have a strong institution, the majority of that institution or members of that institution will take decisions. Now, imagine Joe Biden says, I'm going to stay on because it's one strong personality with strong will. But unfortunately, the body and mind may not carry on. So he has to succumb to the normal pressure. So majority decision is the key. I think that is the hallmark. When majority are taking decision, you as an individual, whether you are a president or a monarchy or whatever, you have to succumb to the people. The whole world will be looking at the American society to say, okay, now that Joe Biden is gone, will Kamala Harris unite the party? Will it deliver the expected result? Because it seems as if Joe Biden has carried on and the Democrats will eventually lose, people will not say, okay, because he did not step aside. Now, the man has done the honorable thing by stepping aside. So the whole world will be looking at that party and looking at the American side. Let's see, let's not be that it's Joe Biden that was the issue. Joe Biden is out of the way now. Whoever takes over, Kamala Harris, let the American side rally around him and see how he performs in the November elections.
Sir Leonard Anyogo is a Nigeria-based constitutional lawyer. He spoke to VOA's Paul Ndiho. There are many lingering questions surrounding the recent assassination attempt on former U.S. President Donald Trump. VOA's Philip Alexiou spoke with James Hamilton, the founder of Hamilton Security Group. He says one of the issues behind the attack was that there was not enough security personnel on hand for such a large outdoor venue.
I think it's manpower. I don't think it, I know it. You hear people say, how do you get that close to the president and take a shot? Well, let's stop that conversation right there. It wasn't, the acting president has a different protective profile or package, we call it, than the ex-president or a candidate. And so it's smaller. That's just a fact. And from what I'm reading today is that the Secret Service had relied on the local police, the local authorities to secure that outer perimeter. Right, that's their operation for that particular, day. That's not to say that that's what they would do with the, with President Biden, but for that particular situation on Saturday, that's the understanding is that outer area where those buildings were located was supposed to be secured by local law enforcement. And it indicates also that the local law enforcement was actually in that building. How they let the guy get on top of the roof, that's a question that the investigation certainly is going to uncover. And I think what you're seeing is the Secret Service, they're owning it. They're not saying that, we're putting that on the locals, but it does sound to me as though the Secret Service wasn't securing that building physically. They were relying on the locals to do so. And then, once the guy shows himself as a threat, we clearly know that they had thought about that building because they were able to take him out with one shot very quickly. A very difficult day.
Well, so someone has to take responsibility, and is it enough for the head of the Secret Service to say, I take responsibility, and then continue on? We're talking about the director, Kimberly Cheadle, who has come out and answered a couple of questions with the media, but what are your suspicions and what pointed questions would you have?
If you're going to do an outside venue, you certainly need more people, and they know that. And if they're asking for more people, you got to give it to them. There's obviously always the dance between the campaign, the candidate, what they want to do, and what security wants to do. An outside venue is exceptionally more difficult than an inside venue. Exceptionally more difficult for all the various threats. Whether or not the Secret Service director is held accountable for it, that's up for politicians and her boss to decide. But certainly someone's got to take responsibility for it, and then just get better. That's the thing. I think two things. One is it shows how incredibly difficult it is to secure somebody in an open area in America, period. It's extremely difficult to do. And second of all, once it happened, the response by what they call the shift was textbook. They got on top of him, they kept him safe, they moved him to the car. So, should it have happened? Of course not. But did they respond effectively to it? They did. They did respond effectively to it.
And is this a fireable offense if somebody were to be fired or not?
My experience in the federal system, it's very, very difficult to fire somebody. I think that it can be done. There's precedent for it, but that will be a decision made, ostensibly by the executive branch, Joe Biden, Secretary Mayorkas, and her bosses. But certainly it begs the question, does this qualify for something like that? And I think it's definitely, worth asking that question for sure.
That was James Hamilton, founder of Hamilton Security Group, speaking with VOA's Philip Alexiou. Sudanese are suffering horrendous levels of violence during more than a year of war between the army and the rival paramilitary force, facing repeated attacks, abuse and exploitation by both sides, according to Doctors Without Borders organization. MSF says the physical and mental wounds of violence are being exacerbated by the collapse of the health system and the lack of an international humanitarian response. Across Sudan, the access to life-saving care is being drastically affected due to shortages, widespread obstruction and looting of medical supplies, insecurity, and attacks against patients and medical staff, as well as damage to healthcare infrastructure. MSF is accusing the warring parties of, quote, a blatant disregard for human life and international law.
Sexual and gender-based violence is pervasive, but critically underreported due to the stigma, silence for fear of retaliation, and the void of services and confidential spaces. Data from MSF facilities supporting Sudanese refugees in Chad hint at the widespread use of sexual violence as a feature of the conflict, particularly targeting women and girls.
MSF is calling on the warring parties to cease attacks on residential areas to allow safe passage and protect infrastructure from further destruction and looting. Still to come, a self-described former gangster is South Africa's new sports minister. We'll have more on that after this break.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Lino Khmoudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
In other news, in a mini cabinet reshuffle, Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan fires 2 senior members of government, including the foreign minister. The changes came as Hassan seeks to regain trust from foreign powers over a program of economic and political reforms, including easing restrictions on opposition parties and media. And in Uganda, soldiers and police seal off the headquarters of the biggest opposition party in what a police spokesperson calls a precautionary move ahead of anti-government protests planned for Tuesday. National Unity Platform Party Chief Robert Changulanyi, popularly known as Bobby Wine, says security personnel surrounded NUP headquarters in Kampala, barring anyone from entering or exiting. South Africa's new Minister of Sports, a self-described former gangster, wants to promote a sport that has associations with South African gangster culture. Kate Bartlett reports from Johannesburg.
This is spinning, a turbocharged sport where drivers spin cars in quick, tight circles while passengers perform treacherous, sometimes death-defying stunts. The sport got its start in South Africa's poor townships during apartheid.
We have the best drivers in spinning. And you can see today, you can see there's no seat belts, there's no brakes, there's no windscreens, there's no helmets, but these people can control their cars. They are super, super, super drivers. I scream till my voice is gone, the way I'm excited about the sport.
Marvin Clark promoted this event, which drew several hundred paid spectators. Some spinning is at organized legal events like this one, but much of it takes place on the streets, where out-of-control cars have killed spectators in the past. Those events are illegal and associated with gangsters. One such former gangster is Gayton McKenzie, who was sentenced to 17 years for armed robbery in his youth.
I grew up where the area that you are born in decide which you don't have a choice in which gang you become. As a gangster, going to jail was a badge of honor. You've made your bones.
He came out of prison and went into politics, running on a populist anti-immigrant platform. Now he's South Africa's controversial new Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture.
And there's two reasons why I want to do this. Well, three reasons. Reason number one, there's a massive interest, was my first point I made to you. The second point you made is it's dangerous because they're doing it everywhere because the police are chasing them sometimes. Now, once you regulate it, once you make it safer, and once you put the rules there that you can't do this, you can't do that.
The longtime spinning aficionado says his first task in the job will be to promote the sport. Renowned car spinner Kyla Oliphant says she's hopeful about McKenzie's tenure as sports minister.
He'd like to make spinning big for us, legalize it. Obviously, we'd have the government behind us. I'm hoping that everything is going to go in the right direction, having funding for us, assisting us.
She explains how the sport originally started in the townships as a funeral rite to honor the deceased.
I think spinning is unique to South Africa, like each and every country has their own thing. Spinning back then started before my time. It started off as, well, people used to steal cars and spin around the coffin of their leaders.
For many who grew up in South Africa's impoverished urban areas, danger was always a reality, and spinning was, and still is, a way of life. Kate Bartlett, VOA News, Johannesburg.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.